the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. We know that Russia is somehow escalating. We had two new missiles being announced by the Russian president. One of them was Burevestnik and Poseidon, both of them nuclear powered missiles. And even we had the Russian president talking about the Sarmat missile being, operational, sent to the battlefield soon. How is that going? Looking at battlefield today in Ukraine, do you think we are heading towards some sort of escalation that could bring Sarmat missiles? Maybe we have learned, the British government has sent, you know, missiles. They call it, yeah, I just forgot the name of the missiles that they have sent recently to Ukraine. But in the United States, the Pentagon has decided to authorize this, the president of the United States to send Tomahawk missiles. It still depends on Donald Trump's decision to send them to Ukraine. But looking at what's going on, what's your take on that?
Well, first of all, I have to say that the Russian Federation and NATO are escalating in different ways. NATO countries are escalating step by step, always a bit more, and then checking what's the result. The Russian Federation is escalating in another way. They are waiting and waiting and waiting, and at a certain point, they will answer with a hard strike. And this is a difference, and in the West, they don't understand this difference. It goes back to the experience of room and the large territory. This is the largest country in the world. And the strategy is always let the enemy come into the room and wait for ice and snow, for the mud, and then at a certain point, when this point is very positive for your own side, then strike back as hard as you can. And this is a difference. And the West is escalating again, step by step. And Putin shows the West what will happen. And this is nuclear deterrence, which means we are ready to escalate until the last point, to the nuclear destruction of Europe. And, well, let's have a look at the front line. That makes the situation clear. On a front line of 1,400 kilometers, Russian troops are advancing. Pokrovsk is encircled. In the north, the Ukraine army is really under pressure. And the goal of the Russian Federation is not gaining territories. They want to destroy the enemy. And according to a leak of Russian computer experts, hackers, of the Ukraine general staff, we see an amount of killed and missed Ukraine soldiers of more than 1.7 million people. And I think this is reliable. And I would estimate the Russian losses on something between 100,000 and 200,000. This is related, I think, 150,000, 170,000. And this is related to the great power of artillery, drones, and missiles. And in these points, the Russian Federation is much stronger than Ukraine. I expect that the front line of Ukraine will break down in spring next year, and this is the end of the Ukraine state. This state will be divided. A western part and an eastern part, and the Russian army is in reaching these goals very successful. And the West is under pressure. And that makes the situation clear. What Putin told the West, showing those weapons, is we are ready for nuclear escalation. If you want to play hardball, we will do. We are the biggest country in the world. We have the best chance to survive a nuclear escalation in Europe. And this brings Trump under pressure. He thought he could make a deal, cut a deal with a fast ceasefire. And the Russian Federation wants to meet the deeper roots of the conflict. And the goals of the Russian Federation are not ceasefire. The goals are a neutral Ukraine out of NATO, security and a safe life of the people, the Russian people in eastern Ukraine, and a new pan-European security order with clear claims. And Mr. Trump got more and more under pressure by the deep state in Washington. And we expect the midterm elections next year. And he has to fight for his majority in the parliament. And so he has to meet the ideas and the ideology and the political perspectives of the Republican Party, and large parts of the Republicans are warmongers. And Trump is under pressure by the European Union. So the European Union today is an anti-democratic warmonger despotism, nothing else. It is an anti-democratic despotism. And the European leaders know the only chance to survive for themselves is to continue the war, to prolong the war, because they brought their own countries in a dead-end street, financially, ideologically, and politically. Let me begin with the policy and the ideology. The war in Ukraine is the biggest lie that European population and people were told since the Second World War. It is absolutely not an unprovoked war of aggression. This war did not begin with the Russian invasion on February 24 in 2022. This war began with the NATO, EU, and USA orchestrated and organized coup of the Maidan in Kiev in February 2014. And after this coup, a wave of violence rolled through the eastern parts of the country against the Russian population. And this Russian population started to organize self-defense militias. So the war was orchestrated by the West. And it was very clear those days, in 2014, that the West wants a war in Ukraine. And after all, the Russian Federation did not see another chance but to invade, because they saw, as the OSCE observers and monitors as well, that the Ukraine side prepared for an attack against the separatist republics of Lugansk and Donetsk, for gaining Crimea as well in a military way. And this is the original reason of this war. It is the eastward expansion of NATO, including Ukraine. It is the strategy of the West to include Ukraine in the Western capitalistic circle and to break out Eastern Ukraine from the Russian area of influence. This is the background. That this is something all Western media are lying about. They are lying to their own people. And as long as they are lying, we won't find a way to peace. And European elites know that they brought their countries in a situation of completely losses when the cost of war will come in. So many European countries will face bankruptcy. That's really clear. So the only way to save themselves is to go on with the war. That's the background. And politicians like German Chancellor Friedrich Merz are nothing else than transmission belts of the American financial industry. And the refinancing of the German state by credits and credit obligations depends on the financial industry of the United States. So it is completely logic what he's doing. He's helping his former employer, BlackRock, nothing else. And the cost doesn't matter. In the end of the show, we will see a European Union completely broken down, and we will see in Europe a row of failed states. So the dystopia is a scene of the Hollywood movie Mad Max. And this is something I'm expecting of Europe. But this strategy of European leaders brings Trump under pressure more and more. Possibly he has in the administration 2,000 men and women on his side. But the whole administration outnumbers 250,000 people. And so he cannot win against the deep state. He's surrounded by the deep state and really under pressure by his own party and the Europeans. So that's the situation I see.
Since the market of regime changes these days are so popular and active, and even Tulsi Gabbard was talking about the regime change, how devastating that could be in any country. Do you think that the idea of the war in Ukraine, Patrick, was to do regime change in Russia, one of the main goals? Do they still believe that illusional that would bring them to this sort of conclusion, that there is still have a possibility to do regime change in Russia by, they're talking about seizing Russian assets, sanctions after sanctions, even war, the continuation of the war that could harm Russia in a long run. Is that still the case in the mind of Europeans, at least? Not going to Americans.
Of course, the Europeans and NATO states tried to provoke a regime change in Russia to a more Western-friendly leader, president, to open up the Russian market for grabbing the resources of the Russian Federation, the minerals of the Russian Federation. This is always the goal. To get a new market in Russia, to get a Western-friendly government, and to bring Russia in a situation where they must sell out their minerals and resources for Western capitalism. But this strategy failed. It was a complete understanding of the situation. And the reason for that is most Western politicians don't know Russia. They have no idea what it is. They have no idea of the industrial power of this country. And so the strategy failed and the sanctions failed completely. For some reasons. First of all, the Russian Federation lies under sanctions since 2014, and the Russian industry and the Russian economy managed to live with these sanctions and to produce a lot of things which were imported in former years by themselves. The second thing is, more than 150 countries are dealing with the Russian Federation because they need Russian exports for their own countries. It's completely necessary. And so the Russian Federation is not isolated. The Europeans are isolated. And the third point is the Russian Federation is backed by China and India and other BRICS countries, because BRICS feels strong enough to stand to NATO and the United States. So we see a shift of power from the United States and from Europe to East Asia. And in this play, in this game, East Asia will win, because over there, they're living 3 or 4 billion people, much more as live in Europe or in the United States. And the industry of China is much stronger. This is rooted in the deindustrialization processes, especially in the United States, in the decades ago. So in the end of the show, the Western strategy failed completely. And according to the French historian Emmanuel Todd, we see in the Ukraine war a situation where neither side could step back. The Russian Federation is fighting a war of decision. They cannot accept that 500 kilometers far from Moscow, American missiles will be dislocated. And the West cannot step back, because this would be a worldwide sign for the decline of the West and the powerlessness of the West. And that's the situation we are facing right now.